Want to welcome to the show Graeme Colman. Graeme is the principal at Horizon Research. Graeme, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate some time with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Very, very keen to have you. Now, I want to have a look at some poll results that came out a couple of days ago. We're just picking up on them tonight because they're part of a conversation we're going to be having to do with, where National's at, the National Party, the polls are saying right now. Now, as we always say, the polls are a snapshot of today. No guarantees of the future. We don't typically project to seats and that kind of thing, but it is always good to look at where things are. Your poll was a bit different because you, I'm paraphrasing, you can clear it up for the viewers and the listeners. You were looking at people who have basically decided who they're going to vote for. So the people who know who they're going to vote for, is that right?
No, we come back one step. We poll everybody that responds, but we also ask, are you registered? So those people can really vote, and that usually matches the Electoral Commission numbers on who's actually registered and can vote.
Right.
And then we ask, how likely are you to vote from 0% to 100%? And we then take those who are 100% likely to vote. And we say, if an election were held tomorrow, which party would get your party vote? So it's what we call a definite voter survey.
And does the research show that if they say that today, that's who they'll vote for? Like, is it like a 99th percentile? Like if they say Labour today, it's going to be Labour? Or is there a little bit of...
It can vary. As we've tracked it over the years, it can vary even in the final week. So I think we're very wise just to say, look, it's a snapshot on if an election were held tomorrow, who would you vote for? You can't call an election result on it 4 or 5 months ahead. And it does have a margin of error, even though the sample size is nearly 1,600 compared with 1,000 for the usual polls. And the margin of error is still plus or minus 2.5%. Now, you go applying that to these results, and it's anybody's game. So I think what we're finding, along with all of the other polls in the past few months, is that it is anybody's game. It's very close.
Yeah, that margin of error of 2.5 is pretty good, because normally margin of error can be 3.1, 3.2. So if it's only 2.5, that's even shows hopefully some accuracy within your particular polling as well. I guess that comes to the sample size, doesn't it?
Yeah, what that does too is it gives us finer granularity on subsamples like age and location. It gives us good representation by ethnicity.
Yep.
So we've got very good representative sampling of women, men, people by age, ethnicity, and by a geographical spread. So it does represent the 18 plus population New Zealand wide.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one quick question about the polling. Now, I've got the poll results here up on the screen for people who are listening. The way I see this, that even though you're looking for the people who really have made their mind up, the I really don't know is still quite high, 15%. If you take the I really don't know, I'm not eligible to vote, I choose not to vote, another party, and then all the parties that aren't at 5%, that's about 30% of the vote. So does that therefore mean that 30% of the vote is really not up for grabs? Because if someone's going to vote for the Opportunities Party, they are voting. But that means that really to get 50%, if 30% of the votes aren't going to count, that means what? You only need 35% of the overall vote to get a 50% majority in the House.
Those percentages are expressed as a percentage of the total population, 18 plus. So what you find is about a third. You find about 8-9% don't register, and then you find about 75 to 82% peak actually vote. So there's always this 20% or so who never get to the poll, even though they're enrolled. So the old political dogma used to be, when people were knocking on doors, you get them on the roll and get them to the poll. You've got to do both or you don't get the vote. So, and I assume the rules still apply today.
Yeah.
But there are a number, so you could apply the 80-20 rule, really, that there's room to move, and when the margins between party coalition options are so small, it is it is possible for a 1 or 2% movement to make a huge difference. So in this current poll, New Zealand First is at 4.5%.
Yeah, close.
So much earlier, we had them for the first time breaking 7. We had them at breaking 5. They then slipped down to 3.5, and now they're at 4.5. So the margins of error are large on a subsample size like that. But they're indicative, and we've quite reliably forecast what would happen with New Zealand First over the years. In 2011, we were the first, published the first polling to show that New Zealand First would breach the 5% threshold and get back into Parliament. So we were roundly criticised by others for predicting that, because they weren't, and they still went right up to the final week, but they got in. So, you know, there are fine margins in this, so who knows what Winston will do.
Yeah, and if they're at 4.5%, if that was to be, you know, the kind of percentage they were at in the lead up to the actual election day, I mean, that's only several thousand people to get them over the mark. So that's knocking on the door of getting back into Parliament anyway. Hey, let's have a look at actually what you found, because the headline for your poll results is Labour and Greens could form a government. Tell me and this is from the people who are definite voters. Tell me in a nutshell what you've found. And then I also want to ask you about what this polling that you've done shows specifically to do with Christopher Luxon, because we are going to talk about him today as well.
Well, what we're finding is, based on those numbers, which I would say are everything's within the margin of error these days, the whole outcome. But on those particular numbers, Labour and Green would be able to govern. They would get they would get the majority, barest majority of 61 seats in a 120-seat parliament. Mm-hmm. National and ACT would get 54. Te Pāti Māori, if it had one electorate seat, would get 5 seats in the parliament if an election were held tomorrow.
Yeah.
So Labour and Green could govern without Te Pāti Māori. We did an exercise on the Electoral Commission calculator. If we gave New Zealand First 5% on those numbers, it still wasn't enough to get National ACT in New Zealand First across the 61-seat majority threshold.
But with that result from New Zealand First, if they made 5%, they'd be within margin of error of getting across that threshold.
Well, they're within the margin now. Yeah. They're getting 4.5%.
No. I mean the three parties combined would be within the margin of error of 61 seats.
Oh, yeah, but it's impossible to say, really. So anyone who called it now, I'll take a bet with them. The campaign hasn't started.
As a kind of polling
remember
company,
too, this was done. It closed the day. Went for 5 days in the field, but closed the day before the budget.
Right.
So
okay.
Has the budget affected how people feel and think? Has it made them more or less comfortable? Feel more helped? Less helped? More hopeful, less hopeful? Has the government struck the balance right as it hopes to have, or is it shedding support? Yeah. So, you know, when you wanted to look at some of the figures like age groups,
yep,
there's really only one age group in this survey where Labor's behind, and it's 34 to 45-year-olds, where they're about 6% behind National. Every other age group, which is quite surprising, they're ahead. But when you think of all our other research on real estate over the decades, that middle-aged group, if we call them that, are the homeowners and family makers. They've got children, they've got mortgages. So that could be an Achilles heel in the sense of when a lot of the mortgages come off fixed and onto there's now 5.5 plus 2, probably 7-8% mortgages. With that middle income group, what's going to happen with how they feel? Yeah. And that could have a big effect in the next few months.
It is fascinating that your polling showed, Labour not having support 35-44 because they're millennials. And that means amongst millennials, that age demographic, going. I would have thought, if you had asked me this before the polling came out, it would have been, as they kind of always say, the older you get, the more conservative you get. Not that I entirely agree with that, but in general, and I would have thought you would have seen the 50 plus, 60 plus maybe have more support for National, and the under 50s all be Labor, because it appears that, for example, Christopher Luxon's not getting any cut through at all, especially with the under 40s, under 50s. What does the polling show us about Christopher Luxon as the leader, and how the I guess the society, the country, is looking to him as being our next Prime Minister?
Well, we didn't ask for preferred Prime Minister.
Yep.
So we just asked for a party vote, likelihood to vote. But not long after he became leader, or in November 2022, so November last year, we did one of our regular how do the leaders make you feel? Now, Ardern was leader then, and Luxon was relatively new leader. And he was making 25% of people hopeful, but he's only making 10% of people comfortable. He was pleasing only 7%, and 17% found him boring, and 14% were afraid of him.
Wow.
So we based this study over, we've been doing it for more than a decade, based on US election studies, and the questions are open for other researchers to use around the world. So in US presidential elections, the theory is you don't vote for someone you don't like, and that the more positive attributes a leader has, like inspiring hope and confidence and so on, it can be reflected in the vote. So when we last surveyed in November 22, Luxon was making 25% hopeful. Ardern was slightly below that. And Ardern was making, she was disappointing people. And that was the main, strongest feeling about Ardern then. She was disappointing.
Yep.
So Luxon didn't rate high on disappointment because he hadn't been there long.
Sure.
So it'd be interesting to refresh these, so to try and get an idea of how people are feeling about them. But something's not quite right, because since 2020, National has been bouncing along the bottom. So the highest we had them at was 31.5%. And then they've come down, and they've dropped another 2 in this poll. So they're down at that current level of 21.5. So some confidence we have in the figures is that pre the last election, we saw Labor rising 16% over its 2017 vote, and that's basically what happened. 16%. In this survey, Labor is 17% below its vote at the last election, and it's lost 9% of its 2020 vote to National. But National is still at around about the same level it was in the last election, and it's lost 17% of its vote to ACT. So ACT is consuming the National vote. Labor is losing. It's lost that big advantage it had.
Yeah.
And now it must cobble together a coalition.
And it's not clear, is it, where the where the Labor vote's going? Because obviously, as you say, ACT is growing and National is losing, but that only helps the right bloc. Labor is losing, but the Greens aren't growing in particular. So there seems to be like an amorphous group of former Labor voters at the last election who are still maybe to show their hand as to where they're going to go.
I don't have them immediately in front of me, but we can cross our results against how respondents voted in 2020. Basically, Labor has about 61% loyalty among its 2020 voters. National has 73% loyalty, but it's a smaller group because they only got a small vote in 2020. So there's been some readjustment, but National's not picking up strongly from any particular quarter. It's also very hard to tell where New Zealand First support is coming from. It's not really showing clearly. So it could be the march through the anti-vaxxers is playing some part, or
Maybe
general
so.
dissatisfaction. Yeah.
Maybe so. All right, Graeme. I'm assuming that there's going to be, because if you haven't done one under Chippy versus Luxon, that must be on the way shortly for Horizon.
Yeah, well, what we're doing this research in the public interest, so we don't have a client, we don't charge for it, but we do want to monitor where things are as a public service. So we do several surveys a year on different subjects in the public interest. It's part of our the way we want to operate. And there may be an opportunity in June to revisit the political polling and how people are feeling about the leaders. Also, if it looks like coalitions are coming up sometime before the election, we'll be asking again which party they would prefer to lead a coalition, and that can have different results as well.
Interesting. All right. Well, we look forward to those when they come out from Horizon Research. That is Graeme Colman. Graeme, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Pat.